recycling everything that you can? And even if you are, is it making any difference? Well, junk mail, sure, that's just easy to toss in the bin. But that extra effort to wash out those single-use plastics, that can really be a lot, especially when many of us believe our plastic recycling just isn't getting reused, right? So if you're really looking to make a difference, what can you do from the easy steps to the tougher ones? I'm joined for help by Steve Bokanski, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Beverage Association, and Claire Galkowski. She's the Executive Director of the 18-Town South Shore Recycling Cooperative, who recently wrote about just this issue in Commonwealth Magazine, aiming to fight the myth that we're helpless in the fight against waste. But welcome to both of you. You know, we're about to enter into the holiday season here. We're in the holiday season. I want to show some statistics from the EPA, some data on the U.S. plastic recycling rate. In 2018, the rate was 8.7, and now here we are in 2021, and it's dropped to 6%. So basically from 9% to 6%. And I want to know, Claire, what's your take on, are we just using more plastic so it's harder to recycle, so we're still recycling, but there's more, or are we getting a little fatigued?
Well, there are a few things about that number that are misleading. That number encompasses all plastics, not just the bottles and cans and rigid containers that you put in your recycling bin, hopefully. We use an awful lot of plastics in our everyday lives. If you just stand where you are and look around, you will see, plastic laminate on surfaces. The siding on your house might be made of vinyl. That's plastic. Your computer casing is plastic. Your mattress is plastic. Everything we touch practically is plastic. So all those things figure into that low recycling rate. And it's likely that there are more and more of those unrecyclable items going into the market. But the bottles and cans and containers, numbers 1, 2, and 5 especially, are eminently recyclable. And the biggest problem that we have is that consumers aren't putting them in their recycling bin. If they do go into your recycling bin and they're properly prepared, they will get recycled. Sure, there are a few losses along the way, and the recycling industry is always striving to improve their capture rates because it's in their financial interests too. But yes, if you put the right thing in your bin that's not filled with salad dressing or anything like that, then it will get recycled.
Claire, your background there behind you is one of the handy-dandy charts of what we should and shouldn't be putting in our municipal recycling bins. And Steve, I'm going to get you in this conversation in just a second, but I want to stick with Claire just to talk a little bit about how much effort we need to put into the things that go into our bin before we take it out to the curb or wherever it ends up going. Should we be washing everything out, even soda bottles, and should we be putting the caps on them or the caps off them? What's the right protocol for getting our materials in the best possible condition to make them more likely to get recycled?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that. They don't have to be sterile. Just a quick rinse or just empty out any liquids that are in there. They don't want any of the food. They can't recycle. They can't make plastic out of salad dressing or ketchup. It just, put a little bit of water in, put the cap on, shake it out if it's stuff that's stuck to the sides, and empty it out, of course. Yep, cap on, put it back. And the reason you want to put the cap on, the caps are made out of polypropylene, which is number 5. That has value, and they're too small to be effectively recovered at a sorting facility because they'll fall through the screens and end up in the glass or in the trash. But if they're on the bottle, then they will go through the sorting process, and they're separated at the next step because one of them, the bottle plastic sinks and the cap plastic floats, or vice versa. I'm not sure which, but it's very simple to for those two components to be separated.
So, Steve,
And
we're talking about bottles. We're talking about almost every beverage we drink these days comes in some sort of plastic bottle, and the bottles themselves have gone through quite the transformation from when I was a young adult, much less a little kid. Can you talk about what the beverage industry is doing? Are you focusing more now on making the packaging more recyclable, and are you thinking about ways to reduce the amount of plastics that we're using?
First of all, Sue, thanks for having me on. And you're right. The bottles that you'll find your favorite beverages in are made from PET. The bottles are 100% recyclable, including the caps, and they were designed that way. We didn't, our bottlers and distributors didn't just come up with some plastic that's the cheapest or the easiest to make. We came up with a plastic container that is 100% recyclable. So for this Christmas season, we hope everyone throws a couple of those extra bottles into their recycling bin.
What's your experience with, I remember the first time I was doing an event, and one of the younger volunteers said to me that they were shocked that it cost money to recycle things. That, they had wanted to have a really, and they were right, an elaborate recycling program, but we had to explain to them what that would add to the budget. Steve, what is the cost parameters? Not in specifics, obviously, but how are the manufacturers dealing with the costs around producing, acquiring the plastic that can be recycled, acquiring recycled plastic? I mean, my pen comes from recycled plastic. How is that working when it fits to your business model of actually having to make a profit for the businesses that you're running?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's more and more demand for PET all the time. Currently, PET is being used for carpets, for clothing, for shoe wear, all types of apparel, and many, many other uses. So for the bottlers, the major brands have all set goals for using more and more recycled content in the future. And for that increased demand, we need a little more supply. And that's why we're looking at different ways to get more of those plastic bottles back. Because again, they're being used by many, many different industries, and that leads to a supply issue when the demand gets a little stronger.
Claire, there's been a lot of reporting over the years about where our recycling goes after it leaves our bins, and there's been news reports about China rejecting our plastics, our recycling, because it was dirty or they had too much of it. There's been concerns that it goes somewhere and doesn't get recycled. It just ends up in a landfill or worse. What's your experience with the areas that you manage about where the recycling is going after it gets picked up?
well, certainly up until 2018, when China embargoed our trash, which it kind of was getting to be trash, things were getting pretty sloppy. The recyclers were able to be paid for a load that had, this, that, and the other thing in it, whether it was recyclable or not. And yes, a lot of it was not the ones and twos and fives that China was looking for. So those things did end up by the wayside, and the government of China cracked down. The businesses in China are hurting because they can't bring the stuff in now. But what happened in the past few years is that our domestic capacity has been increasing a lot. There's been a lot of investments made by the recycling industry to beef up our processing capacity, and we use a lot of the stuff now here in the United States. That had been eroding over the previous decade or two because so much of it was going overseas. There was a huge appetite for it over there. So we actually lost a lot of paper recycling capacity right here in Massachusetts. And now we're starting to see it. We're seeing it coming back. And we also see demand surge because, like Steve said, companies are trying to meet consumer demand for more recycled content, but it's really hard to make that because so much of our material is just not put in the recycling bin. We're losing about 70% of our material to the trash and to litter. which is a crying shame because the stuff's really valuable.
Claire, so what's the message to people? How do you get folks to actually recycle at this point? I mean, it's not about, or maybe it is, education. We all know that when we throw a bottle in the trash, it's definitely going to a landfill unless somebody comes by and it's returnable and wants to get the return fee on it. But what's the message to people to really start to dig in and recycle the plastic that we have in our environment?
Well, the first thing is, don't buy it if you don't need it. If you can remember to bring your refillable container, that's the best thing you can possibly do. It's a tough sell because people love convenience. It would be great if we had more convenient places when we're out of our houses to put the stuff. And, you know, a lot of towns don't offer public space recycling. And even if they do, they're a mess because people don't really pay attention to where they're throwing things. They just chuck into the nearest container they can find. So it's hard to distinguish the trash from the recycling in public spaces. That's why a bottle bill is something, and I don't think Steve is kind of with me on this one, but you know,
I want to ask you, Steve, though, what's the next stage for beverage companies? I mean, we've watched the plastics that are used become lighter, which is good for everybody. It's good for the transportation. It's good for the bottle space on the shelves. It's good all around. What's the next gen for beverages? What can we expect to see them in the future?
I think you'll continue to see plastic being used again. If the container is 100% recyclable, then you know it's not really the container that's the issue. But we're always looking for new ways to get more of those bottles back. That's why we launched the Mass Recycling Challenge program here in Massachusetts in 2012. And at the national level, the American Beverage Association launched the Every Bottle Back initiative in 2019. And that's really to promote awareness, to encourage people to do better job recycling, and to help support investments in infrastructure. So those are sort of the main steps that we're taking. We are looking at all kinds of different things like extended producer responsibility, and done right, we think that can derive many benefits.
Claire, is a takeaway message that it's better to do something rather than nothing? Like if you're really stressing out about this, or you think it's just too much, just put it in the recycling rather than just throw it away?
No. That's the hole we're trying to climb out of now. Since China stopped accepting our stuff, it's become more of an issue, but it was always an issue that, you know, we can't recycle all plastics. The only plastics we can recycle are rigid plastic containers. And, you know, if you can see behind me, this is from the Recycle Smart, which is run by Mass DEP. RecycleSmartMA.com has basic guidelines. You can see bags will tangle up the sorting equipment. Food and liquids really mess things up, especially in the summertime. Clothing, which we're seeing more clothing in there now with the new waste ban in effect. The recycle bin is not where you put your clothing for recycling. There are donation bins all over the place.
It's not a barrel filled with wishes. It's not like because you want to recycle it, it's going to magically get recycled. And there's plenty of places.
The only way it's really recycled, it's not recycling when you put it out at the curb. It's recycling when it becomes a new product. And if it can't be made into a new product, then it's just taking a long road to the landfill.
All right, Claire and Steve, I appreciate you both joining us and getting this message out to folks during the holiday season with lots of entertaining. Just check, there's information everywhere. It's actually on top of the bin. You can read it there. Thanks so much for joining us. Happy holidays.
Thank you for having us, Sue.